Let's get started. Thank you guys all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. My name is Michaela Campbell, and I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Congressional Fire Services Institute. As many of you might know, CFSI is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to educate the federal government on the needs of the fire and emergency services. Our strength comes from our National Advisory Committee and the member organizations that work together to develop consensus policy positions and then communicate those positions to the federal government. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by representatives from several of CFSI's partner organizations on the NAC. Each of these individuals plays a huge role in advocating for the fire and emergency services on Capitol Hill and beyond. So here today, in addition to myself, we've got Ken LaSala, the Director of Government Relations and Policy for the International Association of Fire Chiefs, Seth Statler, the Director of Government Affairs at the National Fire Protection Association, Ryan Woodward, Chief of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs at the National Volunteer Fire Council, and Sean Carroll, Director of Government Affairs for the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. And I should also note that all of us are former Hill staff, so we're very excited to walk through this conversation, and we'll certainly do our best to answer any questions. So as you think of them, throw them in the Q&A, and we'll take questions at the end. So to kick us off, I think I would love to have a little bit of a conversation about why is it even important to meet with your members of Congress? I think many folks on this webinar probably already have relationships with their members of Congress or have had meetings before, but just in case, I know we've also been approached by some folks that are kind of interested in getting started. So, Ryan, can I start with you first? In your opinion, why do you think it's relevant for folks from the fire service to be meeting with members of Congress, and what are some of the benefits of doing so?
Sure, absolutely. It's one of those things where emergency services, unless really you're directly involved with it, can often be taken for granted. It's really a good idea to educate your member of Congress about the presence of emergency services within their districts and their community. What's the breakdown? What are some of the budget concerns? This is especially relevant as we have received cuts to AFG and SAFER in recent years, and it's a really good idea to have that established relationship with your member of Congress to give them an idea as to how these programs serve your community and why robust funding is needed, and why we often hear that excuse, well, isn't fire a local issue? But in many cases, no. It's an issue with local jurisdiction, but it often needs federal assistance. So just to educate them on who you are, how you serve your community, and what your needs are, it's very important to give them that understanding. Especially too, since on the congressional calendar, you often may have to reach out to a member of Congress or a staffer and let them know about an issue last minute. And it's always good that they're educated with an issue beforehand, and they're not seeing it for the first time right before they're running down to the House floor.
Like that old make a friend before you need a friend.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's better to know them so you're not running in. And the other thing I wanted to follow up, Ryan, but also Seth or Ken, would love for you guys to weigh in on this. Ryan, when you were on the Hill, how big was your portfolio of policy items? And where was fire in that portfolio?
Oh, huge. I handled all foreign policy, all homeland security, and my boss at the time was, a chair and a ranking member of a subcommittee on homeland security, and then also DoD, and whole bunch of slew of issues. So fire, even though we were the co-chair of the Congressional Fire Services Caucus, was only just a narrow part of my portfolio. And in personal offices, which is the offices that you'll be dealing with your members of Congress, everybody handles a portfolio that is a mile wide and an inch deep. So it's very important to educate staff as much as possible, this way that they can be as knowledgeable about what your issues are.
Seth, out of curiosity, what was your policy portfolio when you were on the Hill?
So I also had the great honor of working with two co-chairs of the Congressional Fire Services Caucus. And while that was probably what I loved the most, it was not anywhere close to the bulk of my work. I worked appropriations, actually was an associate staffer for the House Appropriations Committee, which includes funding basically all parts of the federal government and all of the grant programs across the federal portfolio. Also worked on agriculture issues, business and budget issues. And, it sounds like a lot, but it's very, very typical for everyone that works on Capitol Hill. And it's not just the staff that have these huge portfolios, then it feeds up to the chief of staff who's trying to kind of manage all of that and the member of Congress. So this is why members of Congress and key staff can only really be experts perhaps in a couple of areas and are reliant on the type of work that we all do to keep them informed about other issues.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. That's that. I actually did not know that about your policy portfolio, but it's fascinating. Mile wide, inch deep. I think both of you said that, and I certainly had the same experience in my policy portfolios. I had DoD, VA, and DHS, of which FEMA is under DHS, of which fire is under FEMA. And then I also had a separate portfolio that was tax, budget, and retirement. And that was in some ways related when there were fire issues that crossed over, but otherwise that whole portfolio was separate. It was fascinating. And it was always helpful, I think, when people could, the timelines are so short that it's like, well, if you get this question from the boss, who are you going to call? And the answer is the people that you know. So actually, Ken and Sean used to come talk to me when I was Hill staff. So whenever I had fire questions, I would call Ken and Sean and solved my problem. So I think that's making sure that you're the person that they want to call or that they know they can call is always very helpful. And they especially want to hear from constituents. So if you're a fire department and you make yourself available, or a local organization, and you let them know what your area of expertise is, that's a relationship that a lot of them grow to depend on. I know some members of Congress have like lists that they track in emergency services, and they'll add like a mailing list almost, and they have folks to keep you apprised of what the member office is doing, but it's also a resource for them when they need something to know who to reach out to. So trying to be on those lists, I think, can be very helpful. And a lot of times it's just an introduction. So speaking of introductions, I think let's move to the next phase, which is how to find your members of Congress and request a meeting. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment and walk through this. Okay. Is my screen up? Can one of my panelists just nod or smile? Okay, thanks guys. All right, so this is up on CFSI's website. We are doing a Hill Day on February 12th, 2025, and would certainly welcome anyone from any organization to join us and move forward on some of these issues collectively. As I mentioned, CFSI is a consensus organization, and there's several priorities that are going to be of interest in 2025, but also the topics on this page are not specific. You can certainly go beyond that if you have things that you want to discuss. So hopefully this is a yes and proposition, as opposed to anything that is overly prescriptive or specific. But the first step is if you want to find your members of Congress and request meetings, I like the congress.gov page. I think it's pretty easy. So if you open, this will walk through the whole thing, but I'm going to walk through the steps with you guys individually. So the first thing is I like to use congress.gov. You can use several other websites. You can even Google, Maryland Congressional Delegation, and it'll pull up, or you can, there's the House of Representatives website has a Find My Member based on zip code. The Senate has a Find My Senator, and there's a drop down so you can pick the state. There's several ways to do this. This one's pretty convenient because it kind of gives you all of them at once. But there are some nonprofits that also have some of this as well. So whatever source you use is fine. You're going to type in your address. So I will use the CFSI address, which is 1101 Wilson Boulevard in Arlington, Virginia. And it'll bring up your members of Congress, which in this case is Representative Beyer, Senator Kane, and Senator Warner. So this one's convenient because it has this little contact button right here underneath the senators and the representatives. So you can just click that and it will bring you to their website. Senate and House websites are for the most part standard. So it's lastname.house.gov or lastname.senate.gov. The only reason that's not a complete rule is because sometimes they have the same last name, in which case sometimes it'll be like jacksmith.house.gov. So you're better off just typing it into Google and finding it. So in this case, his contact form is up here. Usually they want to know if you're actually a constituent first, which is why it's relevant to know this. But also they often have a contact tab up at the top or sometimes down at the bottom of the website. In this case, it's up. Oh, it's down at the bottom and at the top. And they have this thing called meeting request. That's what you want. So it'll ask you to fill out your contact information, where you live, And it'll ask you when you're available. So if you're coming to the event on February 12th, you would put, I'm going to be in DC on February 12th, available at these times. You can pick the DC or the district office. And if you're in a senator's office, this would be a DC or a state office. And those are the offices for the congressmen and senators that are back in the states or the district. So they're local offices. And then what topics do you wish to discuss? So we've got a little draft here if you want to use that, just to explain, fill in your issues, but this is what I'm looking to discuss. And then another example over here is, let's just so that we can see more than one page, let's navigate to Senator Kane's page. So in this case, clicking contact right here on the congress.gov thing brings us to Senator Kane's contact page directly. So in this case, I don't have to go up to the top, but I could. So here's where it is on his page, and you just go to scheduling requests. But in this case, it's brought me directly to the page. So I would click scheduling request. And then it's the same thing. What do you want to meet about? When are you available? What are you looking for? Who's going to be there? Anything else you might want to add? And again, you can use the sample language, whatever you want. You can update it, make it your own. But that's the general process for requesting meetings. It's the easiest way to do it. You should typically do it about 2 to 8 weeks before your meeting. Depends. Sometimes it can be last minute if you didn't know you were coming down. And you don't always need a meeting in order to drop by. You can always bring information with you and leave it with the member of Congress, or ask if they've got time for a photo op. Sometimes for a constituent, they can sneak in 5 minutes for you to say, hey, and then that's where you have your elevator pitch prepared. So you're ready to go no matter what kind of opportunity you're given, which we will talk about later on in this conversation. But happy to take questions on that as we move towards the end, but that's the basic process for how you would request a meeting. We basically do the same thing. Sometimes we have contacts in the offices, so we'll reach out to those folks. If you have contacts already in the office, you can certainly go through them instead of going through the page. The purpose of using the scheduling page is to get you those contacts that then you can use in the future, so that you're building that relationship. So when we say building the relationship, that's part of what we mean, is that you're starting off initially as strangers, maybe you don't know anybody, but eventually you ideally have a point of contact in that office that you can stay in touch with and reach out to directly. But it starts with a basic scheduling request. So I think that's about all that can be said about the process of scheduling requests. So Ken, can I move to you for a minute? I got, as you're looking at your members of Congress, people should feel free to reach out to all of them. You are a constituent for all of them. But what kinds of information should you try to know about your members and their offices, and how can you find it?
Oh yeah, Michaela, thanks. So it's important, much like you're sizing up a building that's on fire before you decide your plan of attack, you also need to get to know the members of Congress and kind of who they are. So there's a couple of good things you need to know. Obviously, one, make sure you know who's a House member, who's a Senate member. Make sure, obviously, if they're in your district. But then more importantly, get to know kind of what their big issues are that they're running for, get to know what committees they're on, what their fields of interest are. A lot of stuff you can actually just get from their website. If you go to the website, there's a couple of things. It has the member's bio, so you know what their background is. Also in there, it talks about what committees they are. In some cases, they may be a committee chairperson or a subcommittee chairperson, which actually is jurisdiction over one of the issues that you really care about. Also, we can also go to like congress.gov, which Michaela was showing. That's where you can actually see what bills they've introduced. Take a couple of minutes looking at their social media pages to see which things that they're kind of broadcasting out to their constituents. And then also, take a look at their press releases and things like that. The other thing too, never hurts to take a look at Wikipedia. I guess people argue back and forth. Most of the stuff in there is fairly accurate, and also discuss some background issues you should know about. And also, just check the news clips the day before too. That way, kind of what the members can be focused on when you come in and meet with them. The other thing too, obviously, you should see if they are a member of the Congressional Fire Caucus. And if not, you should totally hit them up for membership. But yeah, so basically the big thing is, you know, who are they? What's their background? And to be frank, I think a lot of members, probably some of the folks on this call, you may already know your member of Congress because a lot of them are previously elected local officials. I know from the fire chief's perspective, occasionally we'll take in one of the fire chiefs who knows the representative really well because representative appointed the fire chief to their position when the congressman was a mayor. So, you know, it's always great to have that personal touch. But yeah, so that's it. You know, just make sure, again, the members' website's really helpful, things like congress.gov. And then, you know, make sure you're kind of aware in the morning what the big issues are that the congressman or the senator will be focused on.
Ken. Yeah, just for reference, the Google searches that I usually run before I go to a meeting is the member name in Google, and then I check the news tab just to see what's happened to them in the last like week or month. And then I add fire to the end of that just to see, and go back to a general Google search just to see if there's anything in particular that they've done that I don't know about related to fire. And you can adjust your search terms depending on what you're looking for. And then sometimes I'll do what Ken said, I'll poke around their social media, but sometimes I'll look through their social media for keyword searches like fire, just to see if any of them have tweeted about a fire department or something, because there's always a good nexus to be like, hey, saw this information from 2 months ago or something so exciting about that fire department getting a grant or whatever it is. So yeah, Google and to a certain extent Wikipedia can be really good friends. Does anyone else have a
Well,
particular search that they run prior to meetings? Oh,
I would
Ken,
just
go
add
ahead.
real quick, one quick thing. Also, you know, feel free to reach out. If you're a member of the NVFC, feel free to call Ryan. If you're a member of IFF, you know, call Evan. And obviously, if you're a member of the IFC, feel free to call Ken or Steven. Because A, we like to know that you're up on the hill, and then B, we'll be glad to give you some of this input that way you don't have to look it up yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And if you're not sure, you can just email update@cfsi.org and tell me what you're doing, and I'm happy to connect you with any organizational that you need, or just kind of keep track, or happy to answer any questions as well. The joy of CFSI's National Advisory Committee is that I'll talk to any of you. Um, so the other question I wanted to ask is, are meetings typically with the member of Congress or staff?
I guess I guess there are two parts to that. One is, you know, obviously, you may be meeting with the member of Congress or you may be meeting with staff, and there's pluses and minuses to both. Obviously, if you meet with the member of Congress, they're the boss. So if you get commitment from them to do something, the member is more likely to do it. Also, you know, obviously, especially on the House side, the members can be around longer probably than the staff are. These days, congressional staff turnover is really kind of quick. So one year you may meet with the member of Congress and one staffer, and next year it may be you, the member of Congress, and some totally different staffer. So it's always good to meet with the member of Congress. The one thing you run into is that their time is really short. And then the second part that you run into is the fact that they will use some of that time for good old fashioned politics. So, especially if you're in uniform, they'll want to take their picture with you. A lot of times you end up with a lot of kind of hometown discussion. How's the local football team doing? How's the baseball team doing? Are we going to make it to state? That type of thing. And that's all nice and friendly, but these guys are politicians. It's also so they don't have to tell you no about something that they want, that you want them to do. So, you know, meeting with the members is good. Just make sure you're focused and keep the meeting, you know, focused on, you know, either like the IFC hot sheet or the information that Michaela gives to you. And then the other side, from the staff perspective, I mean, they actually do all the work. So they like summarize the bills and memos, put in there what everybody's arguments are. They write all the statements that go down to the, when the members either at a hearing or goes down to the Senate floor. They write the hearing questions. Sometimes I've actually was at one time at a meeting where the member said, sure, we can do that. And the staff was sitting there shaking his head no. I will tell you that the staffer apparently won that argument. So the good thing is if you work with the staff, they will level with you. They'll tell you kind of what you need to do to get the boss's approval and get the boss's support. So it's always worthwhile to invest time with the congressional staff. The other thing too is they move around. So you may see someone in one office and then they may be up on a committee. And I would say just if your member, for example, if it's a tax issue, you're meeting with your representative who's on the House Ways and Means Committee, and they've got a subcommittee staffer on Ways and Means. If you can figure out how to get that subcommittee staffer in there, that's going to be really valuable because those people tend to be around the longest. And they also know the most about the issue. So you can have meeting with members is great. Meeting with their personal office staff is great. And sometimes if you can get the committee staffer there, sometimes you can actually have a fairly frank and honest discussion. That's just something to think about as you're going forward. But meeting with members is great. But if you get stuck with the staff, quote unquote, stuck with the staff, that's not such a bad thing because it will also be really helpful. And everything, getting to Michaela's big point, when the staff are asked by the boss, hey, what do I think about this? You want to be on the staffer's Rolodex. So that way the staffer will call you and say, hey, what do you think about this bill? Because we've actually had situations where a member is supportive of our bill, but the staff have literally told us, like, we have to get we have to get this interested constituent in our district to support this bill before we'll sign on to it. So, and obviously you would like to be that person.
Also, adding to what Ken said, quick lightning round. Ryan, what's the fastest you ever had to write a memo on the Hill?
Oh gosh, minutes.
Sean?
Yeah.
Yeah, about the same. And that's why when I was working with you, I would always try to, whatever I emailed you, I tried to formulate in a way that you could cut and paste it into the senator's memos. So
Seth and Ken, I assume it's also minutes for you?
It's definitely minutes, Michaela, but I can also recall situations where I was walking with my boss through the tunnel to the Capitol where the vote was occurring. There wasn't, there was no way to do a written memo, and we would call the person who I knew in the state or the district might have the answer. And, if possible, you want to be that person when there's a vote on fire or emergency services legislation. You want to be in that staffer's phone so that he can let the member of Congress hear directly from somebody back home.
Exactly. And then my next question for you all is, show of hands, who started as a staff assistant? So the next step after staff assistant was a legislative correspondent. And then after that, yeah, it's typically, if you get promoted, it's either to like leg aid, which in some offices is like an intermediate step. In some offices, they use it in a different way. And then legislative assistant. So staff assistant, LC, let's put leg aid in there, legislative assistant. And then above the legislative assistant is usually like the legislative director. And then you've got the chief of staff, and then you've got this member of Congress. So even the lowest person on the totem pole is under 10 steps away from the boss, and Hill offices are small. So in a house office, Ryan, what was your house office size approximately?
Oh, we were really small. We were 5.
Okay, so 5 staff, and then in the Senate, the staff can be a little larger. So I think just on a guesstimation, I think ours was like personal office in DC 20-ish. And then also promotion tracks tend to be really fast. So I was a staff assistant for 3 months, and then I was a legislative correspondent after that. I know of friends who were LCs for like 2 years and then got promoted to LA. So even if you meet with somebody when they're a 22-year-old staff assistant, if you give it like 3 years, they could be a house side LD. So that's something that I think is very easy to forget. I don't know if anyone else has a similar type of story.
I mean, Paul Ryan was a staff assistant, and then he was a member at 28, and then 20 years later, he was the Speaker of the House. So absolutely,
yeah.
And I have to jump in, Michaela, and just say that, the receptionists that greet you when you go into an office, sometimes it's a paid receptionist, sometimes it's a student from the district doing an internship, but those people can easily move up. They can be the chief of staff by the next time you come back. And there's some fantastic stories about a former Maryland senator who, the receptionist in the office was actually the governor of the state's mother. And so you can imagine that the folks who went in with kind of a bad attitude or were dismissive of the receptionist in that office did not fare well in the process. So just, meet everybody, you know, even the interns are some of the best and the brightest people from around the country. And, you know, your paths very well may cross again.
Now,
BC,
building
sorry.
on
Yeah, go
that,
ahead, Sean.
I was gonna say, building on that and what Ken was saying earlier about, meeting with staff versus members. I remember when I first started working in the fire service arena, over at your organization, Michaela. You know, we would have people in for the symposium and they'd come back from the Hill and some of them would be upset. And we're like, you know, why are you upset? Well, we only met with a member for 5 minutes and then we were with this staffer who's 22 years old for the rest of the meeting. And Hill staff are very young, quite often. I said, well, how long did you meet with that staffer for? Oh, we were in there for 45 minutes. I'm like, I would love to get my hands on congressional staff for 45 minutes, right? Like, and I had to explain to them, like, yeah, this is a good thing. This, you know, this is the person that is going to inform the member about what we need. Very few members have any experience in the fire service outside of posing in front of a fire truck with a big check because they got a grant, right? So if you get an opportunity to spend 45 minutes educating congressional staff, even 15 minutes to educate congressional staff on the importance of these issues, that is a huge win.
Well, I could not ask for a better segue, so I'm gonna seize that opportunity. Most meetings are probably going to be scheduled for 15 minutes, but as you've heard in the course of this conversation, you should be prepared for it to be anything from like 2 minutes running after the member down the hallway as they head from their office to a committee room, to the member drops by for 3 minutes and takes a photo, shakes your hand, introduces themselves, and then heads out and leaves you with staff. But you should always just assume, have two versions of your pitch, basically. Have the 30-second elevator pitch ready to go, and then have your 15-minute meeting format. So let me walk through that for a moment. I'm going to share my screen again. So here we are back on the Hill Day page. This is the page we were on earlier about requesting meetings. Scroll down a little further, and this is a quick template that lays out some of the basic steps for a 15-minute meeting. So typically, I like to talk about this as a funnel shape because what you're ultimately doing in every meeting is funneling down to your ask. And I cannot state enough that you have to make the ask. And when I say make the ask, you have to say the very specific words of whatever you want that office to do. So I think typically you want to start the meeting off by establishing your credentials and who you are. So don't just say your name, also say your title and your organization or your department, and maybe give them a quick rundown on what that means. Because you heard about the size of policy portfolios. They're so big that if you tell them your title, they don't necessarily get, I mean, a lot of staff that work on fire issues think that the only thing the fire departments do are structural fires. So there's a large education gap, which is an opportunity for you to become the new best friend of this staffer and really be the person that they can call and understand. So everything is an opportunity with these folks. So introduce yourself. I think it's helpful to very, very blatantly set your agenda. So literally use a phrase like, I'm here today to talk about 2 items. Then whatever they are. In this case, it's fire sprinklers and funding for AFG and SAFER, or the fire caucus. Whatever it is, I think it's very helpful to set that expectation early so that the staff understands what you're there to talk about. Then you have, if it's a 15-minute meeting, you have time to tell your story. This is where you have to use some emotional intelligence. If the staff looks engaged, you can kind of test it, but understand that you probably have 15 minutes and you really want to make sure you get to the ask. So have a little back and forth, leave some room for them to stay engaged. But I would say plan to have maximum 10 minutes. And if you're talking about more than one issue, you need to subdivide that to understand what you actually have for each issue. So if you're there on 2 topics, you have 6 to 5 or 3 to 5 minutes per topic, 6 to 10 minutes overall. If you're there on 3 topics, you have less. So be prepared to be efficient with your time. Step 4, you need to make the ask in every single topic that you're there to discuss. So if you're starting with topic 1, like Hi, I'm Michaela Campbell with CFSI. I'm here today to talk about, we'd love your boss to join the Fire Caucus, and we'd also, we're really hoping you can support AFG and SAFER. In the first sense, let me give you a quick rundown on the caucus, blah, 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 blah about the caucus. Will your boss join? We'd really love to have them on board. Here's this one pager that I've brought that I'm reading off of. Let me slide this across the table to you. We are asking your boss to join the caucus. Now, the second topic I mentioned was AFG and SAFER funding. Let me talk to you about AFG and SAFER funding and how it helps my department, blah, 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 blah. Here's what we want your boss to do is support X amount of money for AFG and SAFER, or we've just spent the last couple of years trying to reauthorize AFG and SAFER, and that was a group effort to get that done. But in every meeting, what we needed people to say was, we need you to co-sponsor this bill, or we need you to vote for this bill on the floor. And those words have to leave your mouth in order to successfully make an ask. Because if you don't state it and you just say, oh, AFG and SAFER have been so helpful for our departments, we really hope your boss can support them, but you don't say in what way, a smart staffer is going to say, absolutely, so important. Thank you so much for coming in today. And they will shake your hand and you will be out of the room, and they've never committed to do anything unless you ask them. You should always leave time for questions. Sometimes it's better to hold them till the end, but if the staff or the member are asking questions during, you're going to want to let them dictate the pace of the meeting a little bit. But remember, don't let them filibuster you out of the meeting without the ask. So if they have a ton of questions, that's amazing. But when they start to wrap it up because they have to run, it might feel uncomfortable, but you might have to say, thank you so much. Happy to answer the rest of your questions at a later date. But before you leave, let me just ask you really quick and state your ask, and then wrap it up at the end. So get the contact information, especially for the staff, whoever you met with. And then after the meeting, either later that night or the next day when everything is still fresh in your mind, be sure to send them a follow-up email. If they've asked you a follow-up question and you don't have the answer to it, and you don't have it in that 24-hour period, that's okay. Still send the email to make sure you've got the right contact, to thank them, formalize the relationship, and you can mention, and I'm still following up on such and such a question, and I'll send you a separate email later about it. And then that gives you, next week or in 2 weeks or whenever you're going to have that information. And that way you can make sure that you get in that quick contact and then have a reason to follow up with them again later. So let me stop the share for a moment. The biggest thing that I do want to mention that was on that page is that when you're taking questions, don't guess. So if you're not sure what they're asking, don't just start throwing out an answer to the question. And the other piece that I like to, some who have heard me speak about this, I really like to emphasize it. You might know the answer to a question, but if you don't know why they're asking you that question, you also might not want to answer the question, or at least fish for some more context. So when they ask you a question, you know the answer, but you're not really sure why they're asking. It's totally fine to ask for more context. And if you get the sense that they're asking you a question because they're hoping to get information about you to lead the meeting in a way that's not maybe the most advantageous for you, it's totally fine to punt and say, let me get back to you on that. Because what you don't want to do is answer a question in a way that might hurt you later. And that could be either by giving bad information because you panic and you don't know, or by answering a question that maybe you should have just thought through your answer a little bit more by deferring and getting back to them later. But in general, these meetings are super formulaic, which can be pretty uncomfortable if you are trying to build rapport, because you do need to specifically ask them things. And being the person who's responsible for asking was the hardest part of my transition off Capitol Hill. It's really nice to be able to sit in a meeting and have people ask you for stuff, and then you can just kind of sit there and nod and not really say that much and take notes. Being the person that has to actually have the words leave your mouth about what you want is a lot harder. And we get that it's hard. It can feel really uncomfortable, but please know that the staff expect this. Like that is their job, is to receive these. So even though it might feel a little awkward to say, and this is what I want your boss to do, that's what they expect. That's the point of the meeting, and that's what they understand that you will be bringing to them. So it's totally fine to do that, but just make sure you do it. Don't feel nervous and feel like you can't do it. So I know we talked a little bit about using one-pagers. And Sean, I would love to talk to you a little bit because we talk about one-pagers. I'll pull one up in a second. It's literally because it's one sheet of paper with information, but sometimes people might hand them to you in a Hill Day packet or something and say, use these one-pagers. You know, can you talk for a second about what a one-pager is? And I'll pull it up. And then if someone hands you a one-pager, how do you think about turning that one-pager into a meeting or into talking points, into a comfortable narrative for you?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, like you said, one pager is literally one page. It is a summary of the issue you're there to talk about and what your ask is. So, as we
Let me
discussed,
pull one up.
as we discussed a little earlier, you know, a lot of staff, a lot of members have no experience in the fire service. You know, at best, you know, they met a firefighter during fire prevention week in elementary school, and you know that is the extent of their exposure. So you're going to be throwing a lot of new information at people. They're going to be trying to absorb it. But like most of us, when you're not familiar with something, it's nice to have something to reference to. So these one pagers are really helpful in summarizing the topic you're there to discuss and also what the ask is. So here's a great one on AFG and safer appropriations. Very clearly states right at the top, what are we here to talk about? We have background that goes into what the fire service does, the challenges they face, and how AFG Safer plays into that. You have some quick bulleted talking points about the importance and the benefits, and then our ask is clearly spelled out at the bottom. So this really follows a very similar structure to your meeting that Michaela laid out, and gives a reference document at the end. So when that staffer is then trying to write up the memo on the meeting they had to bring the ask to their member of Congress, they have a reference point right here that they can include.
So can you talk for a second, like there's a lot of information on this page that may or may not fit into the 3 minutes you have to talk about it. And also, in order to take some of this information and make it personal, I think we usually encourage people to bring a story with them. So how do you kind of put that together? I mean, is it okay to use some of these talking points? Do you have to use all of them? And then, like, Sean, if you were looking at this, would you reorder them for your purposes so that you feel more comfortable delivering the message? Like, what do you think about when someone hands you a one pager and is like, basically turn this into a meeting?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you need to tell your story. How is AFG and Safer impacting your community, your fire department? So if you've been successful in getting a recruitment and retention grant, you know, as you're sharing this, build that narrative into it and how it's important. On the other hand, if you've got a 40-year-old piece of apparatus that's still one of your first two engines, talk about, you know, the economic challenges in your community and how you need these grants to help you replace that piece of apparatus so you have a safer engine responding to calls. So yeah, some of this is going to, you know, be much more on point towards your personal experience in your community than others. So use this as a guide and a template, but tell your story and the impact to your department.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And you know, one thing I'll point out, so maybe you're from a volunteer fire department and you've got a particular story about your funding. So maybe this talking point is one that you want to focus on. Or maybe your department or you specifically work with a USAR team. So maybe you would want to talk about disaster preparedness, or your department has just faced a hurricane or a tornado or whatever it is, or in the last few years has, and that's something that you could bring in. So you don't have to hit every point on here, and you can order them in whatever way is comfortable for you, because you're handing this paper over at the end of the meeting. So you don't want to have your head down just reading off the sheet. You want to pick the pieces on here that are going to help sell your narrative, basically. You need enough facts that you can provide actual information, and hopefully these one-pagers are intended to, we've done the research and pulled this information for you so you can cite us, which makes it a little easier for you, but you should also bring in your stories, as Sean mentioned, and really say whatever is comfortable for you. So, and in this case, the ask is right here. So you would basically just want to read that off. And they do change. So this is like a temporary ask right now, but as we move into the new Congress and get a better sense of what's happening with appropriations, we'll all be updating our one pagers. So this is just a temporary one for right now, but because they might see our funding into the new year, in which case we'd still be in fiscal 25. So we'd still be talking about that. But that's the kind of thing that you would want to just literally just read it off the sheet. But the other thing is that some folks might have like lobbying restrictions, and that typically means that you can't reference a specific bill or funding item, but you can still go meet with your members of Congress. So Seth, can I kind of have you talk about that a second? And here's an example of a one pager that's more educational. It doesn't mention anything about any bills, and how would somebody use that in a meeting if they're there to educate and build relationships, and maybe there's not quite a specific policy ask that they can make?
It's a great question, Michaela. And yeah, from time to time, you might get direction from your chief or your managers, hey, don't cross the line into lobbying. But in fact, the education component is perhaps just as important, if not more important, than the actual lobbying. All of us who are talking to you on this call spend the bulk of our time educating folks about issues. As Sean said, these are not typically people who have experience with the fire service. This is another great example. Codes and standards. I can tell you that, when I first joined the National Fire Protection Association, I still didn't really fully understand the impact that codes and standards have on all of our lives. And there are specific bills in this area that all of us, in fact, do lobby for. We talk about the importance of fire sprinklers and high rises, fire sprinklers and other current codes in federal housing supported programs. We talk about the Pro Codes Act, which protects the copyrights that allow NFPA and UL and the International Code Council and others to keep revising and improving the codes and standards. Those are all specific asks. But before you even get to that, you need to make sure the staff understands the importance of codes and standards. And you know it because of the type work you do. You know how important it is for the operations of the fire service, for the structures in your community to be prepared. You know it for emerging technologies, right? So again, when Michaela had on her list, maybe tell one personal story, time given, this is a great chance to talk about the EV fire that might have occurred in the member's district, or something that brings to life the importance of codes and standards and the importance of always updating them. Because if you're using a version of the National Electric Code from 25 years ago, it's not even going to talk about electric vehicles. It's not going to talk about lithium-ion battery fires and how difficult they can be for the fire service. So this idea of educating folks is very critical, and we we sometimes, as former congressional staff, would be relieved when somebody came in without a specific ask, and you just had a chance to learn about critical issues. And again, to emphasize the point, I think this will be the fourth time one of us has said it, but it's worth repeating because it's one of the key takeaways, I think, for today's discussion is the education discussion is building a relationship before you need something. Take any basic marketing or public relations course, and they tell you the best thing to do is to build that relationship. And so, whether we're educating about codes and standards or just educating about what you do in your department or in your company, it's never bad to have it just as an educational effort. And again, just to emphasize, I think what's already been said, follow up. The staff is not going to be able to hold on to the paper copy that you give them. It's good to send them something electronically. Hopefully they put it in a file. Hopefully they mark it with your name and your department's name. You know, one technique we used in my previous role at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was we would take iPads with us to meetings and show them brief videos. And I do emphasize brief because again, you know, this is a tight time frame. But if you have a chance to show staff your response to a electric vehicle fire, or how bad it is, or how quickly it happens, or maybe a quick video on the comparison of a fire put out by sprinklers versus the same type side by side incident without sprinklers. You know, that quick video could be a lot more memorable and stay in their minds longer than the actual fact sheet. So think about that. And then the final point I think I would make is just to watch it with acronyms. You know, all of us who work in the fire service, there's a lot of acronyms. And AFG and SAFER are two that, you know, that we use all the time. The staff you're meeting with may not even know what those acronyms stand for. They don't even realize, you know, the difference between volunteer and a career department, or you know, a combination department. So you just got to think that the education really is important, because we've got to make sure they understand the basics so that when we do have an ask, we can go back to them and they hopefully have that background to understand it, and they see you as a credible source to check with.
Thanks, Seth. That's a great point. One thing I do want to mention while I'm still on the shared screen is these are just example one-pagers. So if you go to the Hill Day page and you look at preparing talking points and gathering meeting materials. So for example, here's a fire caucus one-pager, and that one has an ask, which is join the fire caucus. If you were nervous about carrying something with an ask, or you've got a restriction, download the version of it. That's the same thing. I just popped the ask out. Same thing with the codes and standards. There's one on FirstNet, AFG and SAFER funding. So you saw the one that had the ask in it. And this is an example of what it looks like. Oh, that was the one with the ask in it, but there's one with it pulled out as well. So it's basically that same one pager. It just pulls the ask out so that you can tell your story. And I would just emphasize that this is where the national organizations can be helpful as well, because if you're having a meet and greet kind of meeting and you're sharing your story and they ask you, well, you know, what can we do about this? You can connect them with one of us, and then we can explain to them what we're doing at the national level that might be more connected to a policy ask. So that's one way that you can do a handoff where you're the local point of contact, and you're building that relationship. But if they have questions specifically about policy, that's literally what all of us do every day, and we're more than happy to carry that water. And that way you are free and clear, and you can just connect them with us. And then I know Seth mentioned a little tip and trick there. So I'd like to do a quick kind of lightning round. If you had one piece of advice to offer, a tip or a trick for, or I guess a tip or a strategy, maybe is a better way of saying that. What do you think is helpful to know going into meetings? Let's start with Sean, and then Ryan, then Ken, and then Seth. We'll circle back around to you. You can have another pearl of wisdom. And I'll check the Q&A while we do this.
Yeah, I would say, you know, some people, first time they start meeting with members of Congress, staff, they tell them what they think they want to hear. That's not why you're there. You're there to tell them what you need them to know. And it's okay to say, I don't know, when you get a question. Just make sure you try and get them an answer later. But yeah, don't tell them what you think they want to hear. Tell them what you need them to hear.
Yes, my turn. Yeah, I would just say, make sure that provide local data, tell a local story, and make sure the data is correct. If you give a member of Congress a story about, like, oh, on there was an AFG or a SAFER grant that revolutionized recruitment and retention in my community, or I got an apparatus that I wasn't able to afford otherwise, that's something that's going to be the sell. And then that member of Congress is going to be like, wow, this was value added to my district. Don't rest on the laurels. Don't assume that they know. And that's just my tidbit.
Yeah, I think what the other guy said was perfectly right. The only thing I'd add is stay focused. you go in there, you have your set agenda, stick to that, and especially, make sure you stay within character as it was. If you're the fire chief, go in and talk about fire chief issues. Don't start talking about abortion or tax cuts or some other unrelated issue. Just make sure you're focused, say what it is that you and your department need, and then, make sure that they understand it. Like Ryan said, add a bunch of, details about why it's important to you and your department as constituents to the member of Congress. And then, shake their hands, take the picture and get out.
And I will close back on the note of, give them something visual that, that they'll be able to remember and think about longer than all those fact sheets that hopefully are adding up in their computer. And, two ways to do that. And one is to invite them out, right? And, even staff that work in Washington, D.C. often go home to the state or to the district. And then other staff you're talking to, already work for the local office. Invite them to stop by the station, invite them to an event, invite them to the banquet that you might have, and, invite them when they're receiving a grant to come by. But then also, the final visual tip, I'll combine this all into one since Michaela only allotted me one, is, give them something that helps them remember you. Maybe it's a hat, maybe it's a patch from your department, maybe it's a coffee mug. And there are very strict congressional gift limits that the staff will be aware of, so don't try to take in something too expensive, but a simple patch or something is oftentimes gonna help them remember, oh gosh, yeah, I met that great person from the fire department back home. And probably be a point of pride. It might be something they actually keep, because a lot of the gifts they get maybe aren't treasured as long. I'll put it that way. So, something from the fire department is likely gonna be more meaningful.
Members of Congress love challenge coins.
I have several stickers that I was given actually on this bulletin board right here back from my Senate days.
So yeah, I saw you look at yours, Michaela, and I'm
I
kind of
was
glancing
checking
at
just
mine
to
that I
make
have
sure
right
I still
here.
had them up, and I do.
Yep.
The one tip I would have is have fun. You are a constituent, you are a voter. Members of Congress want to talk to you. It's very easy to undersell your expertise if you don't have a policy background. It doesn't really matter. If you get asked a policy question, just say you don't have an answer and then call someone who does have a policy background. Any of us on this call will talk to you at any time about a member that you have interacted with, and there is no question too small. We are happy to have that conversation. But when you show up in your uniform, look official, and you are carrying water on behalf of the profession, but you're the expert in your profession. You want to be smart about what you say, because this isn't the place to be airing your grievances right, left, and center, right? Like, you're there on behalf of the National Fire Service. But building that relationship is just having a conversation, and it's a conversation about you and your job, and you are the expert in yourself and your job. So that's what they want to hear from you. It's not, it can feel sometimes, I think, higher stakes than it is. And if you ever get out of a meeting and you're not really sure, you can call one of us and we're more than happy to tell you, or help you with follow-up or craft whatever it is to make sure that you can clarify something if you want. But honestly, it's kind of fun because we have the fact that you can go in and talk to your members of Congress is great. And you should take advantage of that because you vote for them, and you may as well see if you can have a conversation. And I also think what Seth said was great, because sometimes it can be hard to understand or conceptualize of what relationship building looks like. Sometimes it's just a meet and greet. And I saw a question in the chat about that. Yes, it's totally appropriate to have a meet and greet. I would suggest, if you're doing one, try to bring in at least one pager. Like, if they're on the fire caucus, you can thank them for joining the fire caucus and then check the national organizations. And I would bring at least one with you, but you don't have to spend a ton of time on it. The bulk of the conversation can be about, whatever you're thinking about interacting with the staff. I also think those opportunities back in the district, everyone loves an invitation. And even if they turn down 5 invitations in a row, your record of contact with that office is you asking them for nice things, basically. You're not asking them to do anything in particular. It's a, hey, if you have the time, we're having bingo night on Friday and we'd love it for you to swing by. There will be pizza. Hey, we're having a graduation ceremony. We'd be happy to reserve you a chair. If you're free, no pressure. would love to see you. You're welcome to swing by. You know, whatever it is, you can keep it very low stakes, and it just helps make sure that the record of contact is more casual. I did see one question in the chat. So it's from the top. I think the question about scheduling on January 2nd or 3rd, Ken's answer to that, contact them in early January. I was looking, their websites don't seem to be up yet, and they won't be until January. So as soon as their website goes up is when you can put in the meeting requests. They have staff now, but the only way to get a hold of those staff is kind of if you know a guy who knows a guy who's working for so-and-so. But their websites will be live in early January. So if you're going to come to CFSI in February or to any of our the other organizations that are having events kind of at the beginning of this year, you can set those meetings up in January and they will anticipate that. The senator have influence on their state senators. Ken's answer was pretty good sometimes, but maybe not. And it's if you're going to have a federal meeting, you probably want to keep it federal, but you should also feel empowered to have a state level meeting. So if you haven't gone in and met with that state senator or tried to do an advocacy push on the state level, many of these organizations on this call have state level representation as well as several other organizations in the fire and emergency services. Interact with them. And I know several states have kind of like joint Hill days at the state level. And those can be really great ways to kind of cut your teeth on advocacy or just be involved in advocacy at a variety of different levels. Unfortunately, it does take all of us at all levels to kind of make progress happen. So anytime you have an opportunity to participate at any level you can, I say take it. It's interesting and it's fun. The form letters. Ken mentioned this and Ryan mentioned this. If one of our organizations is requesting that people send letters to their members of Congress, we are not joking about that. We are not asking for fun. We are not asking for our health. Maybe we are asking for our health because it's very stressful. Yes, that means that it has been probably requested of us that members be received in various offices, and they do tally those. If you wanted to just, if it's not part of one of the national organization campaigns and you're just planning to write to your members of Congress office, your member of Congress's office, that's fine as well. I would encourage you to do that. You may get a form letter back, but that form letter still had to be written and tallied by a legislative correspondent. It's in their system and it establishes a record. If you can meet with them, I think it's best to do that at least once a year. But if you want to chat with them in the interim, yeah, of course, send them a letter. And then that way, if you have other issues you wanted to talk about, maybe in a personal capacity, you can send them a letter from your personal capacity as opposed to maybe things that you would want to talk about in a more work-related forum. That's fine too. But yes, if the national organizations are requesting, it's called grassroots outreach, are requesting that people in the states and districts write to members of Congress about the bill, is very important, is very important. When we were trying to get AFG and SAFER across the line, that was one of the biggest differences was offices that got outreach from the fire service in their state were much more receptive, were much easier to deal with, and had a much better understanding of the issue. And then when we came in on the national level and said, hey, just wanted to have a meeting with you, half the time we would turn on the screen and they would be like, we know, we have, 50 letters. And we're like, okay, so you're in. It makes the experience much more cohesive all around. So please do that if you see that option being provided by your national organizations. They do mean that, and it does matter. There is a one-pager on joining the caucus. It is right on the Fire Day on the Hill webpage on CFSI's website. And do any of our panelists have any last thoughts before we wrap this up? If you have any questions, do reach out. Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
No, I was just, thank you for putting this together, Michaela. I think it's great information. Excited for everyone coming to town in February. And I just wish you, our panelists, and everyone engaged today a very happy and safe holiday season.
Absolutely. That's a perfect note to end on. If you have any questions, please feel free to email update@cfsi.org. This webinar will be posted after the recording is finalized and cleaned up, and we'll get it up on that Fire Day on the Hill page. But thank you all for attending today. And as you kind of move through your own policy journeys, please do feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And thank you for all that you do. I know we all work in policy every day, but truly, we can't do it without the support of the folks doing the actual work in the fire and emergency services. And it's an honor to get to do what we do to help support what you do. But it is so important that your voice be heard. And anything we can do to make you guys as comfortable as possible with these, please let us know. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to all of our panelists, and have a very happy holidays. That's all.